3 times the threat of nuclear war neared. People have undoubtedly always harbored the nagging fear of approaching nuclear disaster ever since Oppenheimer saw his explosive sign of the New World and waxed poetic about Shiva. We all know what it's like to fear a nuclear apocalypse, whether you're worried about Kim Jong-il's rockets or Khrushchev's winter-producing arsenal. It should therefore come as no surprise that the world has several times gone dangerously close to the outbreak of a nuclear conflict given all the nuclear posturing and flexing that has taken place over the years. And that is why today's piece is being written. 3 times, either accidentally or on purpose, the world came dangerously close to a nuclear war. It is plausible to argue that both Eastern and Western governments of the period, particularly the American generals who had advocated for dropping the third bomb on Japan after their surrender, were of the opinion that nuclear war, retaliation, and the Holocaust were all desirable outcomes. The 2 bombs were each approximately 260 times more potent than the bombs unleashed on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, to put that into context. The bomber was set to get a mid-air refueling around midnight on January 23. However, the refueling crew discovered that the bomber's right wing was leaking gasoline, forcing them to cancel the refueling operation. The 8-person crew, however, lost control of the aircraft after the plane was diverted to Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. But as the aircraft descended in a spiraling motion, its bomb bay doors opened, launching the 2 nuclear missiles into the darkness as they descended toward the ground. Its parachute had failed during the fall, and when it reached the ground, it broke up into so many pieces that it took the rescuers 7 days to locate every component. But what was even more amazing was that it didn't literally go nuclear. This specific device had completed 6 of the 7 steps necessary for a nuclear bomb to detonate. Equally troubling is the fact that the secondary core of the bomb has never been found, despite the original uranium core being discovered. Although the government thinks it may still be buried at the crash site up to 60 meters below the surface, there doesn't appear to be any radioactive risk to the residents from the missing core, so finding it isn't a huge concern. This episode, which was only released in 2014, serves as a reminder of how close the world was to the start of nuclear war. Even though the B-59 was in international seas, Team America began to dump depth charges on it in an effort to force it to surface so that it could be identified. Captain Valentin Grigorievich Savitsky, Political Officer Ivan Simonovich Maslenikov, and Second-in-Command Vasily Arkhipov were the 3 nuclear action decision-makers on board the B-59. The nuclear armament of the submarine required unanimous approval from all 3 of these important decision-makers. Vasily Arkhipov was commander of the flotilla to which the B-59 belonged, so the launch of any nuclear weapons from the B-59 required unanimous approval from the 3 officers. Normally, Russian submarines armed with special weapons only required a captain to obtain approval from the political officer to fire. The Americans were bombing them in international waters, and Captain Savitsky was sure that war had already started. He believed the only option was to retaliate with a nuclear torpedo. The political officer Maslenikov concurred with the captain that it was now appropriate for the crew to discharge their weapons. Vasily Arkhipov refused to give the order to launch the nuclear torpedo, refusing to budge even the least amount in the face of protests from the other 2 officers or the uncertainty of whether war had broken out on the surface. Captain Savitsky was eventually talked down and persuaded to surface and wait for orders from Moscow by the obstinate flotilla commander, who remained steadfast and unwavering in his resolve. In order to avoid causing a nuclear holocaust, they arose amidst their American pursuers and made their way back to their beloved and still existing Soviet Union. The heroic hero who saved the world and his entire crew were received with scorn and disgrace by their superior officers upon their return to the Soviet Union. When the truth about the incident came to light, people all over the world gave Vasily the recognition he truly deserved, hailing him not as a failure who should have perished with his ship but as the hero who averted nuclear war, despite the fact that at the time he and his crew were seen as villains. All tests came back with the same conclusion: this was it, the nuclear attack he had been instructed to watch out for, the nuclear strike everyone had been dreading since the end of World War II. Stanislav didn't accept what the tools and readings were telling them since he didn't think the Americans would act in this way. He decided that these were bogus readings and decided to look into them further rather than reporting them to his superiors, going against all of his training and ingrained sense of military duty. All of Stanislav's training demanded that he alert the Soviet military officers of the impending threat as soon as possible so they could prepare for it and order a reaction. The Soviet Union was keeping an eye on America's missile launch sites in addition to watching for incoming missiles, and a quick call made during Stanislav's checks revealed that no activity had been watched at these missile locations. The first of the supposed nuclear blasts would have occurred just minutes later if this dice roll had not been in his favor. The Soviet monitoring satellites that the system relied on had wrongly detected sunlight reflected on clouds as the engines of intercontinental ballistic missiles, according to a later study into the incident. Later, Stanislav is still reluctant to acknowledge that he was positive the results were inaccurate. After that, he remained silent for 10 years until the fall of the Soviet Union, at which point he revealed the knowledge to the public and received various accolades from across the world. The Cold War almost heated up because Soviet satellites mistook some sunshine for heat. Stanislav Petrov, however, made the decision to maintain composure and avoid starting a domino effect of events that may have resulted in a full-scale Russian nuclear attack on the United States and possibly continental Europe. Stanislav Petrov lived a full life in a living world for which he shares some of the responsibility after retiring at the rank of lieutenant colonel. He passed away at the age of 77 from old age. This means that a nuclear war was narrowly averted 3 times. We would all be joining the Brotherhood of Steel or struggling to survive in the radioactive wastelands of a Fallout video game if it weren't for a malfunctioning trigger, a rebellious leader, or a perplexed analyst. In his own time, he enjoys reading and practicing circus skills,